And that is it. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Exemplary Performance webcast, Getting Exceptional Results by Cloning Your Superstars. I know that you are going to learn an awful lot today. My name is Wayne Trammell. I am the moderator for today's webcast. Basically, that means I will be controlling some of the technology, and I will be going through the questions and facilitating the Q&A for today's presenters. We're looking very much forward to this. Again, a couple of very simple rules. You'll get best performance from the webcast if you close off everything. This is actually interactive. We're going to be doing a number of polls, and so your attention would be great. That email will still be waiting for you when you get back. In addition, if you have questions as they occur to you, get them in queue as early as possible, and that way we'll be able to really answer your specific questions, and you'll get the most from our time together. Now, allow me to introduce today's speakers. First of all, Al Folsom is the Vice President of Exemplary Performance, following an illustrious 28-year career in the U.S. Coast Guard. He led the U.S. Coast Guard's training and workforce performance system. He's since worked with clients such as XL Insurance, Quest Diagnostics, Microsoft, and many others. Our other speaker today, Paul Elliott, many of you know, he's the president of Exemplary Performance, consultants to scores of companies across all sectors, financial services, high-tech, pharma. He's the author of numerous articles and chapters, and actually, as of this fall, he and Al have a new book out, Exemplary Performance, Driving Business Results by Leveraging the Insights of Your Star Performers. As a thank you for your attendance today, everybody who is on the webcast will actually receive a chapter of the new book. It doesn't come out till the fall, but you get a free preview, as well as a tool and job aid for capturing the DNA of your stars, and that is not in the CSI way, but it will all make sense to you very shortly. Al, good morning. How are you, sir? We are going to start by finding out a little bit about the audience, correct?
That's correct, Wayne. Thank you. So let's bring up our first poll.
There you go. The first question, and this will help Paul and Al target today's comments. What industry do you work in? Is it financial services, tech, process industry? Are you in government or another? And a reminder, just click the little circle next to the appropriate answer and hit submit. We are going to ask you to do that very quickly, please. Oh, my goodness. They are doing that, so let's share those results. And it looks like, gosh, about 60% are in some other field, 21% are in technology, and there's a scattering in financial services and process. So that's interesting results. Let's find out one other thing, and that is, what is your role in the company? Are you senior leadership and management? Are you in sales, operations, HR, or another? And I'm going to take this time to remind you that we are recording this webcast, so it will be available, and you can also go to the Exemplary Performance site and get a copy of the presentation. So I know we're getting some questions about that. We are happy to provide that to you. Now, again, boy, you guys are very quick today. We love that. Let's close the poll. Let's share the results. And as you can see, we're about 60% or so in HR or learning and development, not quite 20% in senior management, and the rest is scattered hither and yon. So hopefully that helps. Al, why don't I close the poll and turn it over to you, sir.
Thanks, Wayne, and good morning, everyone. And we'd like to dive right in and ask you to think about this question. When business leaders look for ways to improve results, there's a number of approaches that can come to mind. You could shift your strategy, enter new markets, release new products, or even acquire a competitor. Or what we'd suggest today with our webinar is you could figure out how to clone your superstars. Now, who do we mean by superstars? Well, we think we know them when we see them, or rather, we know them when we see the results that they produce. So a pilot lands safely on the Hudson River, or a salesperson exceeds quota by 100% and gets rave reviews from her customers. And we wonder, do these star performers have anything in common? Obviously, the roles are different, but is there any kind of common ground among them? So this presentation, we hope to provide this overview of the commonalities based on decades of our work across many of the Fortune 100 companies, and also incorporating research from others. The underlying models that we present not only describe current stars, but once understood, they can be used to significantly enhance the performance of other folks in role. During our time together, we'll discuss the value and the business opportunity for cloning your stars. We'll then get more specific about how to capture what we call the profiles of exemplary performance of your stars. And then finally, we'll discuss how to leverage the unique insights of stars in a systematically structured way that enables average performers to produce the results that are significantly improved. As Wayne mentioned, we've got some takeaways. We want to offer you a chapter from our upcoming book. And we also want to make ourselves available to you for any follow-on discussion about organization-specific application of these models. Now with that, let me turn the show over to Paul. Paul?
Thanks, Al, and happy to have all of you online and participating in this webcast. So let's start off looking at the value and the business opportunity for cloning your stars. Let's be really clear about something. There are many options on how to improve performance within your organization. We're offering an additional one. But I think we would all agree there's no option on the need to improve performance. The question is, how do we get there? And we believe that what we are discussing today is a strong, viable, and low-cost alternative for capturing value that exists in your organization, but what you may not be fully realizing today. So this discussion is not about talent or talent management. It's not about the capacity for the organization to get better. It's about making the organization better. In a sense, if you can imagine, you buy a plot of land to build a new home, and when you start to excavate for the foundation, you strike a diamond field. But you just go ahead and build the house and leave the value of the diamond field buried in the soil. That wouldn't make any sense. But there are these hidden resources that exist within every organization, within every enterprise, and it's not acceptable for you or for your boss or for your shareholders to leave those resources untapped. And so this discussion is about how do we help the strong, capable, solid performers start to mimic the behavior of your strongest, best, highest performers. So there's that component of the value proposition. There's another component to it, and that is organizations experience brain drain, either through retirement or, perhaps worse yet, by people leaving and going to the competition. The expertise that makes the organization successful today may not be around tomorrow. So what can you do to capture that expertise and allow others to become experts faster based on what's known about your superstars? So let's take a look at some reasons that we attribute for the variance between good and best, between solid and exemplary. One of the things we figure is that raw talent is the key differentiator in performance. Hence, we've had a lot of articles and even books written about the war for talent over the past 10 years. And the underlying assumption is that if we hire really good people, we'll have really good results. Another rationale or explanation for variance in performance could be, and certainly this is a component of talent, but it's more explicit, more specific, that it's intelligence or memory, and that they make all the difference between average and high performers. And then there's, of course, a favorite rationale for many of us, and that is it's hard work. We all kind of enter, we all have the opportunity to be stars, but those of us who break our backs and totally lose any balance between work and non-work, we become the star performers. And then finally, there's the premise that it's just experience. There's been a number of books over the past year or two, Outliers being one by Malcolm Gladwell. It takes 10,000 hours for someone to become a high performer. Well, it's a great premise. There is a problem. 10,000 hours is 5 years of full-time employment. So one of the questions might be, can we afford to take that long to produce high performers? The other problem with this last explanation is we often buy into the concept that practice makes perfect. Therefore, lots of experience is great. The problem is practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. And we can make permanent suboptimal performance. So which, we're not going to ask you to actually respond to this, but which of these do you believe is the biggest contributor to high performance? And while you're thinking about it, what do you believe is the dominant perspective within your organization? Well, as we go to the next slide, you'll see that the evidence doesn't support any of these. Let's just take a look at the second bullet as an example. Most of us have grown up being told that these two characteristics, that is IQ and memory, are fixed or rigid. We're born with a certain intelligence, we have a certain capacity for memory, and it is what it is. Well, all the recent research points out that this simply isn't true. That these characteristics, both IQ and memory, are malleable or plastic. They are directly related to the use or the exercise of the brain, and both can be changed significantly during our lives. In fact, in some research that's been done in this area, there were a group of nuns, I believe in Minnesota, who agreed to be part of a study. They were in a retirement community for the nuns. They had come out of education, they had all been educators, and then they stayed mentally very active throughout their later lives. And this study showed over decades that the size and weight of their brains were directly and measurably impacted by the amount of intellectual activity they pursued during their lives. So these are assumptions that we make that become barriers to harvesting the potential of our solid performers. But let's go to defining who are the stars. Who are the star performers within our organizations? Well, they're not necessarily the busiest. They may not be the most talented. They're often not the most experienced. And they're certainly not those who necessarily have the highest performance appraisals. Stars are those teams and individuals who consistently produce the greatest results. And those results have to be aligned with the strategy and goals of your enterprise. So we can identify those stars using both quantitative and qualitative measures of business results. We can identify them by simply asking management, who are your best performers? If we don't help them use real measures, we'll get spurious answers. And remember that unlike external benchmarking, these folks, these internal stars, these internal benchmarks are currently exceeding expectations within your organization and its culture. So often we have invested heavily in benchmarking high performers in other organizations outside of our own. And then we face insurmountable odds often to implementing what we've learned back at our own company. But by using your own stars, that goes away. In fact, one organization that we've worked with for well over a decade, they've coined the phrase for our work as from the field for the field. So it has the credibility of working and being exhibited by people that are admired within the organization already. Let me give you just two examples of stars. We have worked with research and development teams in the past. One of those accomplishments are marketable products or significant product innovations, and the success criterion is the ratio of products per the number of research projects that are initiated, or the ratio of products to the dollars spent on the research. And we see significant variance in those R&D teams, with the stars being those with the greatest ratios, the greatest return on the investment. Another example would be in the area of a manufacturing environment, the skilled trades technicians. The accomplishment might be equipment returned to service following a failure, and the criteria would be speed of the repair, hopefully the reliability of the system following repair, and of course the cost per repair. And again, we just see significant variance between stars and non-stars. And we've used this approach across multiple industries and literally hundreds of roles. And there's always this significant variance or this upside potential to make things better. So, given that, we want to reinforce in the next slide that these performers may not have the greatest raw talent, but they translate the talent they do have into significant results. In a book of a decade ago called Execution by Larry Bossidy and Ram Charan, they talked about the struggle of executives in turning strategy into results. And they argued that execution should be a discipline within business. Well, in a very real sense, your star performers have found ways of turning your strategy into meaningful results on a recurring and predictable basis. There's this high level of intentionality where day after day, week after week, they focus on improving performance, their own performance, and if they're in management, the performance of their direct reports in a systematic and intentional way. There's a great book out from a couple years ago called Talent is Overrated by Jeff Colvin. And in there he defines the difference between star performers and solid performers as directed practice. This kind of intentionality that I had a good sales call yesterday, today I'm going to have a better sales call, and tomorrow it's going to be better still, because I analyze, I look for opportunities to make things better. So our premise, represented by the two curves on the next slide, are that the talent curve of your organization does not have to be a constraint or does not predetermine the performance curve. So if you look at the little graphic on the left, the horizontal axis is labeled talent, okay, potential, capacity. And when you hire people or assign people to a role, there's some distribution of capacity or potential represented by that curve. The graphic on the right is a performance curve, and the horizontal axis is meaningful business results. And you'll see that the same character shows up on two different places on the two curves. And what we're trying to communicate here is that people with average talent may show up on the far right of the performance curve. And people with superior talent may also show up on the far right of the performance curve. But it's also true that people with superior talent on the far right of the talent curve may show up at the middle or even the left of the performance curve. Another way of thinking about these two curves is that talent is a measure of potential to perform, but not of the actual performance. Businesses do not succeed because they have potential. They succeed because they produce results. And as I mentioned earlier, all the writing about the war for talent, it's all predicated on these two distributions having a cause and effect relationship, when in fact, the evidence indicates that's simply not true. In other words, the war for talent would argue hire better and immediately there's better results. Well, we are not arguing against hiring the most talented people that are available. We're just saying that hiring the right people doesn't ensure that you're going to get the results intended. And again, let me just ask two questions for your reflection. If you hire at the extreme right of the talent curve, will performance always be at the extreme right of the performance curve? And obviously the answer to that is no. Another question to reflect on is, have you ever met an exceptionally talented individual who ended up not being a high performer? And I won't answer that for you, but certainly in my case, I've met many like that. So our premise is that the capacity of people, the talent of people, is only one of many inputs into the work process. And our focus on performance is the measure of the outputs. And it's dependent on all the inputs plus the efficiency of the process itself. One of our colleagues, now deceased, Gary Rumler, said this: if you pit a good performer against a bad system, the system will win almost every time. And this is my addition: your star performers are those who succeed in spite of, not because of, your work system. Then Gary went on to say, we spend too much of our time fixing people who are not broken and not enough time fixing organizational systems that are broken. And we just see this universally across our client base. You need to have talented people, but talented people do not ensure success. So what does it look like? Well, we see it as a process, a work process that unfolds left to right. There's a bunch of inputs, including your human resources, your talent. Those resources are put to work in the context of processes. It could be a sales process. It could be a decision-making process. It could be a medical diagnosis process. And coming out of those processes are the accomplishments that matter. For sales, it's revenue. In a decision-making process, it could be the corporate strategy or plan. Excuse me. And in a customer service environment, it could be delighted customers. And those accomplishments have to be aligned with the goals and strategy of your organization. Now, if you notice, the left two columns are where costs are incurred. The right two columns are where value is produced. So when we do our work, we always analyze right to left. What is the strategy and goal of the enterprise? What outputs are required? And by the way, once we have clarity around the outputs, that's the basis for selecting the high-performing individuals or high-performing teams. Then what activities do those people, what tasks do they execute to produce those results, and what resources are required to do that efficiently and effectively? Now, if we take a look at the next slide, I'm going to go through an example. We looked at the role of financial advisor for a financial services company. Now, the corporate goals or strategy that was driving this project, where there were several, but let me just go through 3 of them. They wanted to increase the percentage of the average client's portfolio under management. Okay, so let's say a client, just for round figures, had $1 million portfolio, and this firm might have been managing $400,000 or 40% of it. Over time, they wanted to move to 50, 60, 70, 80, and obviously, ideally, 100% of the portfolio under management. They also wanted to address client retention problems, and they wanted an improvement of a certain percentage. Clients don't always stay with the same firm forever. What can they do to increase retention? And they also wanted a real focus on getting client references or recommendations so that the financial advisor would be given the names of other people to talk to. Now, they were the business drivers or the business goals that triggered the project. The next slide shows some of the outcomes or results, or we will often use the word accomplishments, that people in this role produced. The high-performing financial advisors produced written business plans with goals around revenue and assets. They produced asset allocations for their individual clients that supported their clients' goals. They produced a trusted advisor relationship. They would get asked questions, perhaps about investments that weren't in this firm's portfolio, but the client trusted them enough to ask them about it. And of course, they also wanted to produce referrals to other qualified prospects from their clients. The next slide shows some of the tasks for 2 of those accomplishments. For a written business plan, there's some representative tasks under that. And for referrals to qualified prospects, here are some of the tasks that were uncovered. Holding client appreciation events, exhibiting superior etiquette appropriate to the customer's culture, and asking for referrals. Now that seems so transparent, but a point of fact is many of the financial advisors simply weren't asking for referrals. And that's the kind of thing, once understood, can lead to rapid improvement. Now, here are, on the next slide, 2 truths that we want to talk about. The first truth is this: variation between the stars and typical performers is radically underestimated by and large. So if you look at the role of sales manager, the accomplishment is the percentage. There'd be multiple accomplishments, but one would be percentage of sales team attaining quota, and the size of the gap would be large, okay? Another role would be research and development team leader. The accomplishment would be marketable products per dollar invested. And again, the size of the gap could be large. So those gaps exist, and the size is often larger than what we anticipate. So what I want you to do now is we're going to do a quick poll, and I'd like you to think about a role in your company. It could be sales, it could be customer service, it could be skilled trades technician, whatever. And once you have that role in your mind, click a button to indicate how large that variance may be between your good people and your best. Now remember, we're looking at the difference between good and best, not between bad and best. So what's the variance between solid performers and exemplary performers?
And folks, we would urge you to please vote. Less than half of you have taken part. We want you to take advantage of this opportunity, which basically means close your email and come back. All right, and we are going to close the poll now, Paul, and interestingly enough, about 40% of folks say the variance is about 20%. About 30% say it's 40%, and a little over 12% say that it's 60% or greater.
Now, thanks, Wayne. And of course, there is no right answer because you weren't all thinking about the same role. But the point is that we all believe that it's big, and the evidence would show it's at least as big as what you think. And so we're leaving untapped value on the table whenever we accept that variance as a given. Does that make sense? When we believe that performance should be distributed normally, just as talent is distributed normally, we're leaving money on the table. If your performance curve is identical to your talent curve, the implication is that the organization and its leadership are not adding value. Okay? Because if you get people in under a certain distribution and performance at 1 year later is under the same distribution, there's something broken. Think of it this way. If you had a coach, perhaps you're a golfer or a tennis player or a runner, or perhaps a health coach or an executive coach, and after a year or 18 months or 24 months, you hadn't improved at all in your performance, would you retain the services of that coach? I think the answer is no. So when we go to this slide, organizations, while the variance is significant, organizations under-leverage what their stars are doing by not capturing and passing on the transferable components of the star performance. In other words, we can't do everything. We can't have people who are, what's the word I want, not clone, but that mimic exactly the performance of stars. But if we can shift the curve at all, that's really important. So what I want to do now is talk about, in order to shift the curve, we have to capture a model of exceptional performance. And we refer to this as the profiles of exemplary performance. On the next slide, we are using the horizontal axis as the performance axis, so it's the outputs or business results. And there is some distribution of what's going on. And what we're interested in is the delta between the standard and the exemplary. So the standard, if it was sales, are the people who are typically getting close to or making quota. The exemplary people are those who are exceeding it significantly. And as we learn about what's happening there on the far right, represented by the star, we're able to shift the profile of that curve. So we have the same number of people producing greater results. And that shaded green area, it's green on purpose, it represents the value of getting better results from your existing workforce based on the transferable components of star performance. Now, just to give you a sense, there has been research primarily in the area of sales because it's so quantitative, of the delta between solid and good. And so in the book by McKinsey Consulting on the War for Talent, A players grew revenue 12 times, 13 times more than B players. In the Sales Executive Council, the top 20% outperformed the middle 60% by 60% when looking at individual salespeople. When you're looking at sales teams, the highest performing sales teams outperform average teams by 180%, almost twofold. Well, how far can you close the gap? We all recognize the gap is there. So let's just stick with sales for a second. And let's say the standard is $1 million of sales in a year, and the exemplary performers are selling $1.5 million in a year. How far can you close the gap? Well, our experience says once we've modeled the performance of your stars, the low-hanging fruit, the easily transferable components of the STAR performance. That is, making clear that a financial advisor should ask for referrals, setting up a clear expectation around something that simple can close the gap by 20%. And rigorous design and investment can close it by 30, 40, or 50%. Let's look at a concrete example here with salespeople. This is derived from a particular project, 400 salespeople, each carrying $1 million quota. The 20 exemplary performers were achieving $1.5 million. If we close the gap by 20%, that's $100,000 per salesperson. And for the 380 average performers, that's an increase in revenue of almost 10%, $38 million. And the entire project, including all the interventions to drive improvement, was less than $1 million. Now, how do we do this? Well, performance analysis is the tool that we use. It requires us to identify the STAR performers in clear and meaningful terms. This often involves both quantitative and qualitative measures. And then do deep case-based analysis. You can't ask STARs why they're good. They'll give you all kinds of spurious, non-meaningful reasons. I got my MBA at Harvard. I've been in the job 20 years. I have extremely strong competitive nature. And none of those things we find out correlate with actual success. We have to get into the nitty-gritty of the work and understand the details of what they produce, how they judge success, and how they produce it. So on the next slide, if we look at how to select those STARs, really we're looking for the top 5% or less. Ideally, they're going to be selected on the achievement of quantifiable business results, and they not only achieve that on occasion, they consistently exceed the metrics that have been established, and they do it efficiently. We're absolutely clear you can't pull them out based on performance appraisals, and usually they have some level of experience. It's seldom that brand new people are your highest performers, although occasionally we do see that. And the challenge is they're often unconsciously competent. By that, we don't mean that they don't understand that they're good at what they do. What we do mean is they can't give you the right reasons for why they're good at what they do. Now, as an example of quantifiable measures, on that financial advisor project, they actually had 17 highly referenced quantitative measures on their performance, and we were able to use those together to come up with the right selection. On other cases, there are far less quantitative metrics and far more qualitative, but the point is you have to move away from simply asking who's good at this, because you don't get the right answers. Once you have those STARs, as I said earlier, you want to go into deep case-based analysis. So we were doing some competitive analysis around some sales teams for a major high-tech company, and the teams had won significant competitive displacements. And what we did was sit the whole team in the room and start to whiteboard how the win had unfolded. Then we started to work one-on-one with the team members and do detailed interviews. Now, obviously, on this kind of work, we couldn't observe the work. The sales cycle was multiple months long. But by sitting in the office of the people, they were able to reach for information or files or notes and provide much more detailed, explicit information on how a critical decision was made or how the proof of concept was built or whatever it was. We focus on the accomplishments, the success criteria, that the stars use, which often vary from the success criteria that the organization provides, and then capture the critical steps or actions or tasks in the context of the work. And we focus on seeking insight regarding critical decisions and sequences and what triggers certain actions. Now we can also talk to the managers and to the stakeholders of the process who have great insight onto what may have been done or new directions that need to be addressed as they move forward. And typically there's no one star who is producing all the outcomes optimally. Most roles have a half dozen major accomplishments, and we end up having a composite. The guy who does the best business plan isn't the woman who develops the deepest trusted relationships with the clients, etc. So we come up with a composite profile of what high performance looks like. Al, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Paul. And so in our final section, what we want to discuss is how we can leverage these unique insights of the stars so that we can enable these average performers to produce results like stars and thereby drive business results. So first, we need to make a distinction. Not everyone can be or is willing to be a star performer. Paul mentioned the 10,000 hour number. It's kind of been a magic number in research about expertise. But it's not just 10,000 hours of experience. It's 10,000 hours with intentionality and lots of feedback. The picture on the left is of the Beatles back in 1957 as young teenagers. But they were playing together, and by the time they came to the United States, still is what we would think of as young people in 1964, they had accrued thousands and thousands of hours of live performances, mainly in Hamburg, Germany, and those thousands of hours of experience exceeded what most rock groups would accrue during their entire careers. The other thing about it is that those live performances had immediate feedback. And additionally, because they were playing so much, their intentional practice about responding to that feedback would occur either the same night or the next day. In fact, instead of playing 1-hour shows, they were playing 8 hours a day and often 7 days a week. Now on the right, Michael Phelps, many have perhaps heard of his exercise and practice regimen. It's 6 hours a day, 6 days a week, and he's been doing that for years. But not just swimming, not just experience. All of that is with precision timing, underwater cameras, all to provide detailed performance feedback. Now, this list that we're showing now, this is the list of what we found as the ingredients for creating star performers. So what goes in other than lots of experience with feedback and practice and intentionality? Well, as I just mentioned about the Beatles and Michael Phelps, there is intentionality about how they go about their work. By practicing in an environment that's rich with feedback, these performers are able to hone what they do and are able to master the fundamentals. They also develop rich mental models. That is, the way that they think about their work, the way that they, what are the cues, what is it that they should expect, who will be the recipient of their outputs, and where they can obtain information, tools, and the resources they need to do their job. Stars have figured this out. You know, there's a story about 3 Masons and about a visitor who came upon them while they're working away chipping at granite. They each had kind of a different way of approaching their work. The first one seemed unhappy. He just chipped away, constantly looking at his watch. When he was asked what he's doing, this first guy said, "I'm hammering away at this stupid rock, and I can't wait till 5 o'clock when I can go home." Now the second one was working away diligently, and when he was asked what he was doing, he said, "Well, I'm molding this block of rock so that it can be used with others to construct a wall." It's not bad work, but I'll sure be glad when it's done. Now the third one was hammer away fervently, and he would take time and stand back and he'd admire his work. He chipped away until he was satisfied that it was the best that he could do. And when he was asked, "So what are you doing?" he backed up, gazed upward, and he said, "I am building a cathedral." Now, that story, it underscores this. The rich mental model of having the big picture, knowing the point of his efforts, and also connecting with the performer's internal motivation. Now, we want to make a further distinction. It's this. The previous list was about what goes into making stars. This list is about what we can get from stars to leverage across our respective workforce. And while we gain unique insights from star performers, we also find what is actually achievable and not just pie in the sky. When we identify stars internal to our organizations, we've identified people who figured out the organizational culture, and so what they produce is within the realm of the possible, since they're already doing it in that very work environment. When we harvest the insights from stars, we find out how the best performers think of the work, what the cues and triggers are that others might overlook or simply are not even aware of. We also find out just what are the key fundamentals, those things that do require practice and feedback. And by extension, we also find out what are the activities that are a lower priority and don't really contribute to value creation. Once we've collected all that, we want to systematically arrange it into what we've positioned here as the exemplary performance system. When aligned to the outputs that produce value to the organization, these stars are the factors that enable people to produce exemplary performance. So, Wayne, I'd like to jump in and do another polling question. And so what we want to ask you to think about is, what's the primary contributor of gaps between your stars and your average performers?
And folks, what is the primary contributor? As best as you know, obviously you don't have all the answers yet, but is it expectations and feedback, motivation and preference, skill and knowledge, capacity and job fit? In other words, do you have the right people in the right job, or the work environment? We're going to give you just another few seconds, please. Just take your best stab at it. And we're going to remind you to please get your questions in queue so that we're going to be tight for time, but we do want to make sure that we answer the questions that we have. So please put those in. Let's close the polling, and let's share the answers. And kind of interesting, about a third of people say it's expectation and feedback. Another third say it's motivation and preference. Nobody really has work environment as an option, and then there's 20%, less than 20% for skills and knowledge and capacity and job fit. Does that sound about right to you, Al?
Well, it's interesting. I'll say that. Let's take a look at our next slide. What we find, and so our questions were a little different than how we have the stars organized here, but what we find is that the top half of those arrows, those are all influences which are external to the individual. And the stars on the bottom half are those that are internal to the individual. But I'd also like to point out that even though those on the bottom are internal to the individual performer, they're still impacted by the organization. So, for instance, the organization can provide training for improving skills and knowledge, although they reside within the individual performer. Or the organization is the one that makes the selection of people, and that's what would result in a good or bad job fit. But what we've seen in our research and research of others is that about 75% of the causes that have a negative impact on performers is among those top three those top 3 arrows. And as you mentioned, expectations and feedback seem to be one of the dominant causes listed by our audience, and that in itself is certainly consistent with what we've found. Now, the question then kind of becomes, so how do you get or make a high performer? Well, there's several premises. First, you could presume it is based on personality type, and if you go down kind of that first column where it says a certain personality type, you could choose the Myers-Briggs ISTJs and get people who have this preference for great attention to detail. Or you could go down that second column, you know, with well-defined competencies, and so that you can get people who can choose quickly and decide on effective approaches. Well, our point is that if you focus on those areas exclusively, we think you're unlikely to obtain the organizational results that matter. So we have this third column, and that is look for stars based on who's already producing the accomplishments of value, and then capture how they're doing that in a context-intensive manner. And in our example, if we want to produce great accountants, we start by finding those accountants who have produced the result of tax return properly filed. And then we use criteria around that accomplishment, like accuracy, timeliness, based on what we've learned from the star performers. When we structure the system this way, we minimize the non-value added activity. So we begin on the right side of the slide with the valued outputs and derive the relevant behaviors or activities that produce the accomplishment. And then we're only deriving the relevant subject matter or knowledge required in the value stream. Now, I think we need to go to an example, and this one, it's just a simple example. It's one slice from a larger project in the process industry. This project involved a lot of different procedures, and it was about onboarding new folks to the role of being an outside operator at an oil refinery. So one procedure that the new operators had to learn was about transferring catalyst from one tank to another. So if you can see this diagram, you know, the procedure for transferring this catalyst, it involved moving it from this tank number 1 over to tank number 2. And you would do that by opening this valve A. And that valve A, you know, after it passed through that, it would go through what we have labeled as valves B, C, D, and E. So back in tank 1, this stuff's at 1100 degrees. And if you let it flow too quickly, then when it gets to valve B, it'll melt it. And so we asked our star performer, and he had a solution. He said, you want to open valve A only part way so that when the catalyst reaches B, it's only 400 degrees. So our question became, well, how do you know how much to open the valve? Well, he said, well, you use this infrared gun, which is something similar in technology to, you know, an ear thermometer. And you point it at the pipe next to valve B. And then you'd be able to monitor what the temperature is of the stuff going through the pipe. Well, we then asked, well, do all the refinery operators, you know, doing this procedure, do they know this technique? Because it certainly wasn't in any of the documentation we had found. And so our star performer initially said he thought everyone, you know, knew that. But then kind of staring at those valves C, D, and E, you see C, D, and E were all valves that had been melted, and so in kind of sequence they had been replaced by another one upstream. As he stared at all those damaged valves, he corrected himself and said, I guess not. Now, our star in this case was very bright. He'd been in the Navy's nuclear sub-program, he had taken courses in thermodynamics, had years of experience in the oil refinery after that. And the question becomes, you know, what would it take to ensure everyone hired into this role had that background and expertise? Well, would that even be possible? Rather, the better question is, what would it take to get all the refinery operators to perform this way? Well, ensure the tools are available and clarify the procedures. In other words, the STAR had come up with a solution, and we don't need to have everyone else solve the same problems. We only need to be able to equip others to use the same solution. Now, in another example, and Paul alluded to this about competitive displacements, well, in doing that sit down and whiteboarding, what was it that enabled the STAR performing team in software sales to win their competitive displacements? We found out that the conventional wisdom was that it was a proof of concept, that the quality of the proof of concept for the potential client, that's what wins the day. Well, in the sales team, there's a technical sales specialist who's affectionately known as the geek. So when we interviewed the STAR performing team, we found that it wasn't the proof of concept that won the day, but rather this technical sales specialist had worked with the client organization to develop what we call an internal advocate. Typically, this I want to keep saying geek, but this technical sales specialist would just be in the receive mode of finding out, the technical details about integrating the new software. But in this case, it became this ongoing dialogue to understand the client organization and the internal person that he was working with, and to respond to other critical aspects of this software in the client organization. So by the time that the proof of concept was shown, the sale had already been won because of the internal advocate that had been built. Well, we'd like to summarize, and this kind of wraps up our presentation. And in summary, how is it that you best leverage the value of the superstars? Well, look within the business to find the places where there is the variance. And then we want to estimate the value of improving performance. We want to define the criteria for selecting stars, and then spend time with those stars conducting case-based analysis. And finally, we want to harvest the accomplishments, the practices, and methods of star performers by structuring them systematically so that we can equip and support others in that role. Now, as we mentioned earlier on, we have a new book coming soon, and we're very excited about that. Please check our website for for update information about pre-ordering the book if you're interested. Like we mentioned, we'll be sending you a copy of Chapter 1. Wayne, let me turn things back over to you for a minute.
You bet. And we know we're at the top of the hour, folks. We would urge you to stay. We do have a couple of good questions in queue, and we want to make sure that before we answer the questions, if you are interested in a no-commitment 1-hour follow-up to see how this can work for you, we urge you to contact either Paul or Al. Both of them are at Exemplary Performance. You can also get more information on how EP works with its clients by visiting the Exemplary Performance website, and that's also where you'll find the recording and the visuals for this program. So let's get right to a couple of quick questions. One is this model the same as Gilbert's 6-box model? Is that consistent?
I'll respond to that one, and the answer is the 6 arrows are equivalent to the 6 boxes. We have categorized things slightly differently than his 6 boxes. Al and I will be co-presenting next week with Carl Binder, who also has a 6 boxes model. They're all derived from the same thinking, the same models. We look at them slightly differently, but the answer would be underlyingly yes.
Okay, terrific. And there was some comments around the idea of talent. Are you basically saying that talent doesn't matter?
Well, I'll jump in again on that one. Talent absolutely matters. It's just that it doesn't predetermine whether or not someone will be highly successful. And again, that little graphic where the person from the center of the talent curve ended up being on the far right of the performance curve. There just is not a direct correlation between the amount of talent, when we mean by that capacity or potential, and the actual results that person produces. Again, if you reflect on that question, can you think of a very capable person, a very talented person who ends up being an average performer? And I've never asked that question and have anybody say no. We can all think of people who underperform against the capacity they were given.
What about then taking these stars and making them mentors? Somebody was asking about the possibility of using social media to spread the best practices, if you will.
Well, I'll respond to that. I think a lot of times that is exactly a result of doing one of these projects. Now, remember back, sometimes we typically find star performers are what we called unconsciously competent. So they don't always realize that what they're doing and getting exceptional results by is not what other people are doing. Even my simple example about the guy in the refinery, his thinking was, well, that's how everybody does it. But the reality is that's not how everybody does it. He was very unique in that approach.
And let me just add one additional comment. As we mentioned, until we do the kind of rigorous analysis, they may attribute their success to the wrong things, thereby coaching the people on characteristics of their performance which aren't really the differentiators. So the way I dress going into an appointment really makes all the difference. I'm suave, sophisticated, whatever. When point of fact is it's the questions they ask or whatever. So it's really important to be, not all high performers are good coaches.
Well, what about those superstars that just kind of check out? I mean, is it easy to get the information from them as you do one of these analyses?
Well,
you take that out?
Yeah, sure. I can think of a couple examples where it was, where it had certain challenges. Sometimes, when we get to the point where Paul referenced that it's work from the field for the field, when we get that kind of thinking going on, we find it's much easier and there's great enthusiasm about being part of a project like this. But sometimes on an initial project, there can be some distrust and skepticism as to, what's this about? Is this some kind of management initiative to downsize the workforce? And until folks realize this isn't a downsizing effort, this is about how to spread the insights that you as a star have figured out so that other folks can do a good job. And I think at times, back to that refinery operator example, when we were able to capture those insights and make that part of the onboarding process, the stars saw their job of breaking in new people was going to be a whole lot easier because so many of these insights had become explicit. And so it made it easier for them to be coaches, and it made their life better as someone who's breaking in new people.
Well, and of course, learning to do this analysis and having people who really are great practitioners is a big piece of this. Again, you can learn more if you'd like a no-commitment 1-hour follow-up with Paul or Al. Please send an email to them, drop a line. You can also connect with Exemplary Performance on LinkedIn and on Twitter. We do these webcasts on a regular basis, and we hope that they are adding value to your work and being a resource to you. We are at about 5 minutes past the hour. I'd like to thank Paul and Al for their time and their wisdom today, and remind you to join us on the next Exemplary Performance webcast. Watch the skies, your email, and we will let you know when that is. Gentlemen, anything you want to say to put a bow around today?
Just want to thank everyone for tuning in.
Yep, exactly. Take care.
And thank you so much, everybody. This will end the webcast.